Just clean out your desk and go." The words hung in the air like a verdict that couldn't be appealed. Mrs. Elena Rodriguez sat behind the desk she had occupied for 34 years, surrounded by cardboard boxes that would soon contain everything she had built at Lincoln Elementary School. No ceremony, no recognition, no acknowledgement of the thousands of children whose lives she had shaped. The principal who delivered the news had already left, his footsteps echoing down the hallway like the final countdown of her career. Just a mandatory retirement disguised as budget cuts, delivered with the cold efficiency of someone who had never spent a single day in a classroom trying to reach a child everyone else had given up on. She was placing the last items in her final box when she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her classroom. Not the familiar sounds of teachers arriving for work. These footsteps were different, purposeful, multiple sets moving in formation like a military unit approaching their target. But what the principal didn't know, what the school board couldn't have anticipated, was that one of those forgotten children had grown up to become someone extraordinary. Someone who never forgot the teacher who saw potential where others saw problems. Someone who was already walking through the school doors, accompanied by 12 men whose job it was to protect the most powerful person in the state. Welcome to Heroes Unheard. Before we continue with this powerful story, tell us in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you think stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We're growing every day, and I sincerely thank you for being a part of it. Lincoln Elementary School had been Mrs. Rodriguez's life for more than 3 decades. Located in East Los Angeles, it served a community where poverty and broken families were more common than success stories. The building itself showed the wear of insufficient funding and deferred maintenance, but within its walls, something magical happened every day in room 24. Mrs. Rodriguez had arrived at Lincoln fresh out of college in 1989, armed with idealism and a master's degree in elementary education. She had been assigned the most challenging classes, the students that other teachers found difficult to manage. Kids who came to school hungry, angry, or already convinced that education was a luxury they couldn't afford. Instead of seeing problems, Mrs. Rodriguez saw potential. Instead of managing behavior, she nurtured dreams. Instead of following curriculum guides, she created individualized learning experiences that met each child exactly where they were and helped them discover where they could go. Her classroom was unlike any other in the school. The walls were covered with student artwork, achievement certificates, and photographs of former students who had gone on to graduate high school, attend college, or build successful careers. She called it her Wall of Champions, and every child who entered room 24 knew that their picture would eventually join that gallery of success. Mrs. Rodriguez had a gift for seeing past the surface behaviors that made other teachers label students as troublemakers or slow learners. She understood that the boy who acted out in class might be dealing with chaos at home. She recognized that the girl who seemed withdrawn and uninterested might be brilliant, but afraid to let anyone see her intelligence. She stayed late every day, tutoring students who needed extra help. She spent weekends calling parents to share good news about their children's progress. She used her own money to buy supplies and snacks for kids who came to school without lunch. She attended graduation ceremonies for students she had taught in elementary school, sometimes traveling hours to watch them receive diplomas from high schools across the city. Over the years, Mrs. Rodriguez had received thank you letters from hundreds of former students, wedding invitations from young adults who wanted her to see them start families, birth announcements from parents who named their children after the teacher who had changed their lives. She kept every letter, every photo, every piece of evidence that her work mattered. But the new administration didn't care about letters or photos or 3 decades of documented success. They cared about test scores and budget cuts and making room for younger teachers who would work for less money and ask fewer questions about educational policies that prioritize data over development. Principal Morrison had delivered the news on a Friday afternoon, after the students had been dismissed for the day. He had been at Lincoln for only 2 years, having been brought in to modernize the school and improve its performance metrics. He saw Mrs. Rodriguez as a relic of outdated teaching methods, someone whose emotional approach to education didn't align with the district's new emphasis on standardized testing and measurable outcomes. "Elena, I know this is difficult, but the district has made some tough decisions about staffing for next year. Your position is being eliminated as part of the restructuring process. You'll be eligible for full retirement benefits, and we're asking you to clear out your classroom before the beginning of next week." Mrs. Rodriguez had listened to his words with the same composure she brought to every challenge in her classroom. She didn't argue, didn't plead, didn't point out that her students consistently outperformed expectations despite coming from one of the most challenging socioeconomic backgrounds in the district. She simply nodded and began the heartbreaking process of dismantling 34 years of her life's work. The weekend had been a blur of boxes and memories. Each item she packed carried the weight of specific moments and specific children. The reading corner where she had taught countless students to love books. The science station where curious minds had conducted their first experiments. The conflict resolution area where she had helped children learn to solve problems with words instead of fists. As she packed, Mrs. Rodriguez thought about the students who were counting on her to be there when school started again in September. The shy girl who was finally beginning to trust adults. The boy with learning disabilities who was making breakthrough progress with alternative teaching methods. The recent immigrant who was learning English and finding confidence in academic success. What would happen to them without an advocate? Who would see their potential when they struggled? Who would believe in them when they stopped believing in themselves? Monday morning arrived with the finality of a door closing. Mrs. Rodriguez had come to school early, hoping to finish packing before other teachers arrived. She wanted to avoid the awkward conversations and well-meaning condolences that would make an already difficult situation even harder. Room 24 looked stripped and hollow without the decorations and learning materials that had made it a sanctuary for struggling children. The wall of champions had been carefully taken down, each photograph wrapped and placed in a special box that Mrs. Rodriguez planned to keep as a reminder of why her work had mattered. She had been working in silence for nearly an hour when she first noticed the sound of cars pulling up outside the school. Not the usual sounds of teachers arriving for work or delivery trucks making their morning rounds. These were different vehicles. Expensive. Multiple engines running in coordination like a convoy of important people arriving for a significant event. Mrs. Rodriguez glanced out her classroom window and saw a line of black SUVs parked in front of Lincoln Elementary. Men in dark suits were stepping out of the vehicles, their movements coordinated and professional. They looked like Secret Service agents or high-level security personnel, the kind of people who protected politicians and celebrities. What were they doing at Lincoln Elementary? The school had never hosted anything that would require that level of security. It was a struggling inner-city school where the biggest excitement was usually a visit from the district superintendent or a local news crew doing a story about underfunded education. The men in suits were entering the building now, their footsteps echoing through the hallways with purpose and authority. Mrs. Rodriguez could hear them talking to the security guard at the front entrance, their voices carrying the kind of confidence that suggested they were accustomed to getting immediate cooperation from anyone they encountered. She tried to focus on her packing, but the unusual activity outside her classroom was impossible to ignore. The footsteps were getting closer, moving down the hallway toward room 24 with deliberate intent. These weren't random visitors who had stumbled into the wrong building. They were coming to her classroom specifically. Mrs. Rodriguez looked up from her boxes as the footsteps stopped directly outside her door. For a moment, there was silence. Then her classroom door opened, and the men in dark suits entered her room with the professional alertness of security personnel conducting a sweep. They moved efficiently, their eyes scanning every corner of the stripped classroom as if assessing potential threats or security concerns. Mrs. Rodriguez watched them with growing confusion and concern. Who were these people? Why were they in her classroom? Had she somehow violated school district policy by taking too long to pack her belongings? Behind the security team walked a young man in an expensive suit, his posture carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to command and authority. His clothes were perfectly tailored, his shoes polished to a shine, his overall appearance suggesting significant success and responsibility. For a moment, Mrs. Rodriguez didn't recognize him. The child she remembered had been small for his age, often dressed in clothes that didn't fit properly, carrying the weight of family problems that no child should have to bear. This man was tall, impeccably groomed, radiating the kind of presence that came with significant accomplishment and power. Then he smiled, and suddenly she saw the child she had taught 20 years earlier. Marcus Thompson. the boy who had been labeled as having behavioral problems and learning disabilities. The student other teachers had given up on, who had spent more time in the principal's office than in his regular classroom. The child who had arrived in room 24 angry at the world and convinced that he was stupid. Mrs. Rodriguez had seen something different in Marcus. She had seen intelligence masked by frustration, potential buried beneath defensive behavior, and a desperate need for someone to believe in him when he couldn't believe in himself. She had worked with him for 2 years, from 3rd through 4th grade, adapting her teaching methods to match his learning style and helping him develop coping strategies for his frustration. She had celebrated every small victory and helped him see that failure was just another opportunity to learn. Most importantly, she had never given up on him, even when he had given up on himself. Now Marcus Thompson stood in her classroom, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most teachers made in a month, surrounded by bodyguards whose presence suggested he had become someone very important indeed. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Marcus said, his voice carrying the warmth of genuine affection mixed with the authority of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. "I heard what they're doing to you." Marcus approached her desk slowly, his security detail maintaining their positions near the door and windows. When he reached her, he did something that surprised everyone in the room, including Mrs. Rodriguez and his own protective team. He knelt beside her chair. "You changed my life," he said simply, his voice filled with emotion that his professional demeanor couldn't quite hide. "Everything I am, everything I've accomplished, started in this room with a teacher who saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself." Mrs. Rodriguez felt tears she had been holding back for days finally beginning to flow. She reached out to touch Marcus's face, seeing both the successful man he had become and the struggling child he had been. The transformation was remarkable, but the essential goodness she had recognized in him as a child was still there, now refined by success and responsibility. "Marcus, what are you doing here? How did you even know what was happening?" Marcus smiled and stood up, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm the governor of California now. And when the governor of California hears that the teacher who changed his life is being forced into retirement without recognition, he comes to do something about it." The words hit Mrs. Rodriguez like a physical blow. Governor Marcus Thompson. She had heard the name, of course, but she had never connected it to the struggling child she had taught 2 decades earlier. Marcus had been elected 6 months ago as the youngest governor in California history, running on a platform of educational reform and opportunities for disadvantaged communities. "How did you find out about my retirement?" "One of your former students works in my administration. Maria Santos. You taught her too, about 15 years ago. She saw the story in the district newsletter about budget cuts and recognized your name. She brought it to my attention immediately." Mrs. Rodriguez remembered Maria Santos, a bright girl from a single-parent household who had struggled with confidence but had incredible potential in mathematics and science. Maria had gone on to become an engineer and had sent Mrs. Rodriguez updates about her career progress over the years. Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger and more authoritative. "Mrs. Rodriguez, what Lincoln Elementary is doing to you is not just wrong. It's a betrayal of everything education should represent. You've spent 34 years transforming lives, and you deserve better than being shuffled out quietly with no recognition of your contributions." He gestured to his security team, who stepped forward with something Mrs. Rodriguez hadn't noticed before. One of the agents was carrying a large, ornate plaque. Another had a folder that appeared to contain official documents. "I'm here today in my official capacity as governor to present you with the California Teacher of Excellence Award, the highest recognition our state can give to an educator. But more than that, I'm here to offer you a position as educational consultant to the governor's office, working on statewide initiatives to support teachers who work with at-risk students." Mrs. Rodriguez stared at the plaque being presented to her, reading the inscription that recognized her decades of service and her impact on students' lives. The official state seal gleamed in the classroom lighting, and her name was engraved in letters that seemed to validate everything she had worked for during her career. "Marcus, I don't know what to say. This is incredible, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for a position like that." Marcus laughed, the sound carrying memories of the child he had been alongside the confidence of the leader he had become. "Mrs. Rodriguez, you're the most qualified person I know. You've been doing educational consulting your entire career, one student at a time. Now I'm asking you to do it on a larger scale, to help other teachers learn the methods that made such a difference for students like me and Maria and hundreds of others. The sound of commotion in the hallway interrupted their conversation. Word had spread through the school that the governor of California was in room 24, and teachers, administrators, and staff members were gathering outside, trying to catch a glimpse of what was happening. Principal Morrison appeared in the doorway, his face pale with the realization that he had just forced into retirement a teacher who was being honored by the state's highest elected official. Behind him crowded other staff members, their expressions ranging from curiosity to amazement to embarrassment. "Governor Thompson," Principal Morrison said, his voice carrying the nervous energy of someone who realized he might have made a career-ending mistake. "I had no idea you were coming to visit the school today. If we had known, we would have prepared a proper reception." Marcus turned toward the principal with the kind of measured authority that came from holding high office. "Mr. Morrison, I'm not here for a reception. I'm here because Mrs. Rodriguez is being forced into retirement, and that's unacceptable." He stepped closer to the principal, his security team shifting positions to accommodate his movement. "This teacher has spent 34 years transforming the lives of students everyone else had given up on. She taught me when I was a struggling fourth grader who other teachers thought was hopeless. She saw potential where others saw problems, and she changed the trajectory of my entire life." The hallway had filled with people now. Teachers who had worked alongside Mrs. Rodriguez for years. Staff members who had witnessed her dedication and success. Students from other classes who had heard that something important was happening in room 24. Marcus raised his voice so everyone could hear him clearly. "Mrs. Rodriguez isn't just retiring. She's being promoted. She's joining my administration as educational consultant to the governor's office, where she'll work on statewide initiatives to support teachers and students in underserved communities." The announcement sent a ripple of excitement through the crowd. Teachers began applauding. Staff members smiled with genuine pride. Even Principal Morrison managed to look pleased, though his expression suggested he was still processing the implications of having tried to quietly retire a teacher who was now being recruited by the governor. Mrs. Rodriguez looked around at her colleagues, many of whom she had worked with for decades. These people had become her second family, and the thought of leaving them behind for a position in state government was both exciting and terrifying. Marcus seemed to sense her hesitation. "Mrs. Rodriguez, you'll still be working with teachers and students. You'll just be doing it on a scale that can impact thousands of children instead of dozens. And you'll be helping train other teachers to use the methods that made you so successful." He paused, his expression growing more personal despite the public nature of the moment. "You gave me hope when I had none. You taught me that intelligence comes in many forms, and that every child deserves someone who believes in their potential. Now I'm in a position to make sure other teachers have the resources and support they need to do what you've been doing for 34 years. Mrs. Rodriguez looked at the plaque in her hands, then at the man who had once been her most challenging student, the boy who had taught her as much about teaching as she had taught him about learning, the child who had shown her that transformation was possible when someone was willing to see past surface behaviors to the potential underneath. She thought about all the students she had taught over the years, all the lives she had touched, all the potential she had helped unlock. The idea of expanding that impact to reach teachers and students across the entire state was both overwhelming and inspiring. "Marcus," she said finally, her voice steady despite the emotions she was feeling, "I accept your offer, but I have one condition." Marcus smiled. "Name it." "I want to spend part of my time back in classrooms, working directly with teachers and students. I don't want to lose touch with the day-to-day reality of education by sitting in meetings and writing reports." Marcus laughed, a sound of pure joy that filled the crowded hallway. "Mrs. Rodriguez, that's exactly why you're perfect for this job. You understand that education happens in classrooms, not conference rooms." He turned to address the crowd that had gathered to witness this extraordinary moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've had the privilege of working alongside one of California's greatest educators. Mrs. Rodriguez doesn't just teach students. She transforms lives. She doesn't just follow curriculum. She creates hope." The applause that followed was spontaneous and heartfelt. These were people who had seen Mrs. Rodriguez's work firsthand, who understood the difference she made in students' lives, and who were witnessing her receive the recognition she had always deserved but never sought. As the crowd began to disperse and Marcus's security team prepared for their departure, Mrs. Rodriguez looked around room 24 one last time. The boxes of her belongings sat neatly stacked, ready to be moved. But instead of representing the end of her career, they now symbolized the beginning of a new chapter. Mrs. Rodriguez, Marcus said as his team prepared to escort him back to his waiting convoy. Thank you for not giving up on a difficult kid who didn't think he had any potential. Thank you for showing me that intelligence and success come in many forms. And thank you for teaching me that one person who believes in you can change everything. He embraced her with the genuine affection of someone whose life had been fundamentally altered by her influence. As he prepared to leave, he added, "My office will contact you this week with details about your new position. And Mrs. Rodriguez, welcome to the team that's going to transform education in California." As Governor Thompson and his security detail left Lincoln Elementary, Mrs. Rodriguez remained in room 24, surrounded by the boxes that contained 34 years of her professional life. But instead of feeling sadness about leaving, she felt excitement about what lay ahead. The boy she had taught to believe in himself had grown up to lead the state. The child who had been labeled as having behavioral problems had become someone who could create opportunities for thousands of other children facing similar challenges. Principal Morrison approached her cautiously, his earlier confidence replaced by something that looked like respect mixed with embarrassment. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I owe you an apology. I clearly didn't understand the full scope of your impact as an educator." Mrs. Rodriguez looked at him with the same grace she had shown difficult students throughout her career. "Mr. Morrison, you were doing what you thought was best for the school. But I hope this helps you understand that a teacher's value can't always be measured by test scores and budget spreadsheets." Over the following weeks, news of Mrs. Rodriguez's appointment spread through educational circles across California. Teachers who had felt undervalued and unsupported by administrative policies saw her story as validation of their own work. Students who had struggled in traditional educational settings heard about a teacher who had seen potential in someone everyone else had given up on. Mrs. Rodriguez's first initiative in her new role was the creation of a mentorship program that paired experienced teachers with new educators, focusing specifically on methods for reaching students who didn't fit traditional learning models. She insisted that the program include classroom observation and hands-on training rather than theoretical workshops. Marcus Thompson's story became part of California political legend. The governor who had overcome learning disabilities and behavioral challenges to lead the state. The leader who remembered his teachers and used his position to support education. The man who proved that transformation was possible when someone was willing to invest in potential rather than judge by appearances. But Mrs. Rodriguez's story became something even more powerful. It became a reminder that great teachers change lives in ways that can't be measured by conventional metrics. That the most important work happens in individual moments of connection between teachers and students. That believing in someone's potential can create ripple effects that last for generations. The wall of champions that had decorated room 24 for decades found a new home in Mrs. Rodriguez's state office. But now it included a special section dedicated to teachers who were implementing the methods she developed for reaching struggling students. The wall continued to grow, representing not just individual success stories, but a movement toward educational practices that honored every child's potential. Years later, when Mrs. Rodriguez was honored at her retirement from state service, Governor Thompson spoke at the ceremony. He talked about a teacher who had seen past his behavior problems to his potential, who had adapted her teaching methods to match his learning style, who had never given up on him even when he had given up on himself. But most importantly, he talked about a teacher who had taught him that one person's belief in your potential can change everything. That success isn't about fitting into predetermined categories, but about finding the path that works for you. That the most powerful education happens when someone cares enough to see who you could become rather than judging who you appear to be. Mrs. Rodriguez had packed her boxes expecting to leave education quietly, without recognition or ceremony. Instead, she had launched a new career that expanded her impact from individual students to entire educational systems. She had gone from being forced into retirement to being recruited by the governor. But perhaps most importantly, she had been reminded that teaching is never really about the subject matter. It's about seeing potential in places where others see problems. It's about believing in transformation when others see only limitation. It's about planting seeds of possibility that can grow into futures no one could have imagined. Sometimes the most difficult students become the most extraordinary adults. Sometimes the children everyone else gives up on become the leaders who change the world. And sometimes the teachers who get pushed aside by bureaucratic policies are exactly the ones who should be leading educational reform. This story was brought to you by Heroes Unheard. Before we leave you today, here's our question. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition but deserved more than anyone else? Tell us in the comments what they meant to you and how you remember them. And if you think stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We'll see you in the next one.